Welcome to you all. And today in Swami Reacts, we will be going through a very beautiful book I recently read called Sri Krishna Prem, A Wing and a Prayer by John Chapple. I've personally been fascinated with the figure of Sri Krishna Prem from the very moment I get to know about him, which is a few decades ago, probably first time reading Saints of Braj by Dr. Obi-L Kapoor, which was a recounting of different saints who lived in Vrindavan, and all of them were Hindus with the exception of Sri Krishna Prem, Ronald Nixon, born Ronald Nixon in England, being a soldier in the army during World War, and eventually finding the truth or looking for the truth and finding it in India, at least to begin with, as we will see, and eventually exploring different paths and ending in a very unique, maybe unexpected way for many of us. So I never got, in the book of Saints of Raja, there is some brief recount of his life, which is fascinating enough as for one to continue to look for more of that. He's one of the first Western converts to Gaudiya Vaishnavism. I wouldn't say the first one, because there has been a few before him, especially disciples of Baba Premananda Bharati and others, some followers of Mahanamrata Brahmachari. But at the same time, I will say that, yeah, Swami Sri Krishna Prem was one of the first ones, one of the most renowned ones, if not the most well-known first Western convert, so to say. So his life is fascinating, and recently this book has been published. I've been in touch with the author of the book, John Chapple, as you can see here. He's an historian also, journalist, and I really like the book. It's a thick one, as you can see. I like thick books. They are challenging, but they are beautiful, and you can know, at least for me, this has been one of the highlights this year. I've been reading the book every night. I'm here recording this in Dijon in France, and I've been also in Germany before. So during the last weeks of my European tour, I've been looking for every night before going to bed to sit with a wing and a prayer with this book and going through the fascinating story of Krishna Prem. Really very beautifully narrated. At the same time, it's a very scholarly work. It has, I think, as Edwin Bryant at Data Prabhu says in the endorsement to the book, more than 1,000 footnotes. And I'm a book nerd, so I go through the footnotes, yes, to each one of them. So I really appreciated that, despite being a very well-researched, extremely well-researched book. It's very engaging. It's a life story. It's a journey. It has many technical details, many specificity, but it never, at least to my opinion, never becomes too much, no? Too dense, too scholarly. It doesn't have a scholar jargon that you really feel, oh, this is too much. This is not a read for everyone and anyone. So it's a very accessible book in how it's written. And the journey unto itself, again, beyond the writer and the author and his style of writing, the life of Krishna Prem is in itself an exciting journey. So the book is divided by three main parts. Pūrva Āśram first, which means his previous ashram to becoming Swami Sri Krishna Prem, and this basically refers to his early life in the West as a soldier, as I mentioned, with going through the experiences of the world, eventually going to India and finding Ma, which will be another name for Yashoda Ji, Yashoda Ma, who ended up being his Guru Devi, his Gurvi, not Guru. Gurvi will be the female for Guru, which is in itself very unconventional, right? An Englishman being initiated by an Indian elder lady into the tradition, who, in order to give him sannyas, she took sannyas first, interestingly, eventually in the tradition of Radharaman, Sri Radharaman Goswamis. So first time is all about that. And again, I'm summarizing. There is so much here, so many notes I've taken, so many beautiful pieces of wisdom. And then we have the second chapter, which is called Vaishnava, which specifically speaks about Krishna Prem becoming initiated, going to live in India, establishing the famous Uttar Vrindavan or Upper Vrindavan in the Himalayas, with Yashoda Ma looking for the land, establishing an ashram there, worshipping Radha and Krishna, Mirtola Ashram, nowadays known, and all that he went through, and his dedication to the path, his dedication to his Gurvi, was unparalleled from what you can see from, you hear from his students, other people who saw him, who met him, Timothy Leary, other figures from that time coming from the West. He met with Ramana Maharshi and many other people. And somehow or other, all of them found in him a very deep commitment to in the beginning, to the Indian ways of spirituality, interestingly enough. He learned the language, he was dressed like one of them, he was embracing austerity and sadhana more than any other Indian, so to say. So, and at the beginning, as the book recalls, the environment in the ashram was very strict, was very austere, and there were lots of rules and regulations on how to do things, how not to do things according to Brahminical standards, which can be too much for most. But we will see how an interesting turn of events happen with the years as they pass. So, of course, there are many stories in between of different visitors, eventually of Madhava Ashish, who will become a disciple of Krishna Prem, his successor, eventually the passing of Yashoda Ma, and the delegation of the whole service and ashram to Krishna Prem. And eventually we arrived to the third chapter, which in my opinion was the most interesting one. I mean, in the sense of this is the part that I knew the least about Krishna Prem, because he's generally depicted as a Gaudiya Vaishnava, and I'm not here to say he's not, or he didn't ended up as such. But the third chapter, and the name of the chapter may give you a glimpse of where I'm going here, it's called Universalist. So Krishna Prem, before being initiated as a Gaudiya Vaishnava, was connected with this Theosophical Society, Madame Blavatsky, Buddhism. He wrote works on that, apart from his famous writing of the Yoga of the Bhagavad Gita and Yoga of the Kathopanishad and others. So gradually, after the passing of his own Gurvi, Yashoda Ma, he gradually started to get rid of certain externals, if we want to call it that way, to begin with, in certain ways of how he dressed. He stopped using Kantimala, stopped using Vaishnav Tilak. He dressed differently, not with the saffron clothes. At one point before, he experimented with Buddhist ochre robe. And again, despite the strictness of the time, also interestingly, there were some interesting standards that were not that much fitting with the classical strictness of the Gaudiya Vaishnava, like smoking pipe or cigarettes or something. So again, for me, it's an interesting case of something very unique, which at the same time you cannot deny his commitment to the inner path. So eventually, and not as something planned, of course, but he ended up becoming more and more inclined to embrace a universalist perspective, which included not only Buddhist and the teachings of Madame Blavatsky, but also Advaita Vedanta in certain way, Sufism. He at one point started to learn Persian, to read Rumi directly in the original language, mystical Christianity, and so on and so forth, while still worshipping Radha and Krishna, while still speaking of the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, but in a particular way, which again will lend itself more to universalism and restructuring. One of the chapters speak about that, how he will give away most of his library, still with a few books, focus on certain particular methods of practice, which eventually he realized Gurdjieff was also teaching those for 25 years already in terms of watchfulness and attentiveness and presence. And yeah, the ashram will gradually take a very interesting turn. In between that is the interesting figure of Motirani, who was Yashoda Ma's daughter, who ended up being a disciple of Krishna Prem and who had a very interesting way and personality, very intense, and how other members of the ashram will, some to say, endure his way of being and sudden rage attacks, but they will see that as ways of testing them, that eventually always had some psychic insight to that, and they could see that in time, and they will trust that very deeply. So very interesting inner dynamics between the ashramites, if you will, presented in this book. Very well informed, as I said, lots of footnotes. I especially liked the afterword of the book, which has been written by the current authority, so to say, the head of the Mirtola ashram at present. Her name is Chitra Iyer. So we had Yashoda Ma, then we have Krishna Prem, then we have Madhava Ashish, and then we have Deva Ashish, who was the disciple of Madhava Ashish, and then if I'm not mistaken, I don't know if she's an acharya in terms of giving initiation, but at least the head of the Pūrva Āśram, and very beautifully written afterward. Let me share a few words from that, since I haven't read anything literally from the book. She says, one morning in 1956, Krishna Prem passed in the 60s. One morning in 1956, prompted by a dream that night, Sri Krishna Prem broke the chula, mud stove, in the temple kitchen. The evening before, he had tended it carefully in a regular ritual, smoothing on a fresh coat of mud, filling the cracks, readying the stove for the next day's service. We can only guess at the compelling nocturnal instruction that caused him to shatter that heat-hardened stove, a symbol of a way of life he had dedicated himself to for 30 years. The temple is, after all, the center of the ashram, and the kitchen is central to the temple. It is the main artery of the temple's material heart, where food is prepared with great care and devotion every day for Krishna and Radha, the presiding deities. But the chula, the mud stove, with its strict rules of access, was also a symbol of ancient and sometimes oppressive hierarchies. So it's a poetic way of mentioning how, well, because also Krishna Prem will, at the end, the last decades of his life, was very much invested into dream interpretation, following psychoanalysis and Carl Jung. But the symbology for me here is, again, for this most interesting part of the book, in my opinion, his transition into a more universalist faith and the getting rid of things that he felt were externals, were not substantial, were rigid, were hierarchical, were part of a relative cultural, sometimes oppressive facet of reality. And of course, by saying all this, while I love the book, I may not agree fully with everything Krishna Prem said or did, but at the same time, I cannot but appreciate his life journey. I mean, despite probably most of the Gaudiya Vaishnava who may read the book may not consider following his path or ending in the way that he ended, in terms of embracing other traditions and embracing Gaudiya Vaishnavism in a somehow more relativized way. And even, we could say, conceiving of Krishna more as a symbol of an unmanifested absolute, in his own words. Nonetheless, despite we may differ on considerable things in how the journey unfolded, it's a journey that is unfolding from a very authentic place. That's for me the most important thing. It doesn't matter to me much if I don't have my journey unfolding in that direction. I don't think that will be the case, though I can totally identify with him in so many levels, in terms of appreciating the wisdom of sister traditions and allowing them to be part of your own journey and in certain ways, and the need for getting rid of certain formalities and externals and relative ways of understanding things that cause mostly religious PTSD more than any form of advancement. I can totally identify with that. But even with the things that I do not identify, I do not see myself going to that point, I can still stand in awe and appreciate his sincerity of purpose. I wouldn't go to the place of, no, he speculated, he was confused, he did some offense, and that's why he ended like that, diluting his original faith. Because you can see here a man of deep faith to his very last breath, who live a life of integrity, who live a life of dedication. I mean, you read the book, and it's clear in every page, every line, every paragraph. He was sincerely, seriously, passionately committed to the truth and to having a personal experience of that. And he had so many personal experiences and epiphanies and visions that are described in the book. So here we are dealing with a very extraordinary personality, in my opinion. And it's a portal, it's a window, this particular book, for those who are interested in getting to know more about Sri Krishna Prem, a wing and a prayer. Recommended in this Swami Reacts today. Looking forward to our next meeting. Thanks so much for joining us.